Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, body positivity, and health at every size. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified intuitive eating counselor specializing in weight-inclusive wellness. Join me as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beef, and now I'm ready for the world. Try and sink my teeth in, stacking it.
Hey there, welcome to episode 109 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with Anna Sweeney, a fellow registered dietitian who specializes in health at every size and eating disorder recovery. And we had a really great conversation where she shared some stuff that she's never talked about publicly before, about how coming to terms with her disability affected her relationship with food and her body, and what it's like to be an eating disorder dietitian, helping people recover and restore their relationships with their body while she was grappling with this identity of her own. So it's a really powerful, really important conversation. We haven't really discussed issues of ability enough on the podcast, so I'm really excited to share this episode with you and to get into all that with Anna in just a minute. First, I want to share a cool new feature that we're doing on the podcast, which is starting now, every week, I'm going to be answering a listener question at the beginning of each episode. So if you want to submit your questions on intuitive eating or health at every size, eating disorder recovery, or any of the stuff we talk about on the podcast, you can do that at christyharrison.com/questions. And I'm going to read the first question right now. So this is from a listener named Gracie. And she writes, I read Intuitive Eating about a month ago and started trying to apply its principles to my life after 4 years of disordered and restrictive eating behavior. Since I started allowing myself to have foods I had previously restricted, I sometimes want to eat them past comfortable fullness and to the point of discomfort. However, I do not feel panicked, out of control, or self-punishing when this happens, which are the feelings I would associate with binges. I think it is me trying to prove to my body that these foods really are unrestricted and plentiful now. My question is this a normal stage for new intuitive eaters? And is there a point when I should actively push back against the desire to eat more of these once forbidden foods if I suspect that it will lead to physical discomfort? Oh, so thank you, Gracie. This is a great question. And yes, short answer is yes, it's totally normal to be in this stage when you're new to intuitive eating. This is what I call the honeymoon phase. And I talk about it a lot in my online course. But basically, the honeymoon phase is this feeling that when you were restricted of certain types of foods and you suddenly allow yourself to have access to them, you want to eat them in large quantities all the time. You find yourself going back to them again and again, maybe to the exclusion of other foods a lot of the time. And that's a completely normal, very common part of this process. So much so that I gave it the name the honeymoon phase because it is a phase that most people go through with intuitive eating. So that's not to say that you're doing it wrong if you don't have a honeymoon phase, because some people don't go through it, but it really is very common, very understandable experience with intuitive eating, because basically what you need is to reassure yourself that you have unconditional permission to eat. And the way to do that is to really not put any conditions on it, to say like, yes, you're allowed to eat as much as you want, whenever you want, the types of foods that you want until you're good and done. And nobody's here to tell you that you should be done any sooner than you want to be or that you shouldn't eat at certain times. You can really trust that you have full permission and allowance with food. And the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can really sink into that permission and fully trust that you have it, the sooner you will move through the honeymoon phase, and those foods will not hold the same allure as they once did, and you will not find yourself eating to the point of discomfort like you once did. So that will pass in time, and I can't put a time stamp on it because it's different for everyone, so don't judge yourself if it doesn't pass quickly, but just trust that the best way to get through it is to just keep going and to keep allowing and giving yourself greater and deeper permission to eat. So I hope that helps answer your question. And for those of you who want to learn more about intuitive eating, you can check out my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food, which is basically my quick start guide to intuitive eating. And I give 7 simple strategies for starting your intuitive eating journey. You can get that by going to christyharrison.com/strategies or by texting the word 7 strategies to the phone number 44222. So that's the number 7 and the word strategies altogether to the number 44222. And then if you want to take a deeper dive into intuitive eating, you can sign up for my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals, which is a 13-week online course to help you make peace with food, really integrate the principles of intuitive eating into your life. And it's built on a foundation of health at every size and body acceptance. So all of that great anti-diet stuff that we talk about in the podcast is baked right into this course. This is not intuitive eating for diet purposes. This is anti-diet intuitive eating as it's meant to be. And we spend a lot of time on helping people reject the diet mentality and root it out even in its subtler forms so that you're not unconsciously restricting and depriving yourself and then ending up having reactions to that, because that is a common thing that I see in a lot of people I work with. So we spend a lot of time really breaking that down. And the course comes with 13 modules of content. There is audio, video as well, and journal exercises for you to integrate the practices into your life. There's also a private Facebook group exclusively for participants to give you a community of people who are on the same journey with you. And then you also get a monthly Q&A podcast from me, which is basically like the question I just answered a minute ago, times like 25 each month. So I really spend a lot of time delving into people's questions and answering people's individual questions. So you get the support of one-on-one coaching within a group context. And people have said that that is one of the most valuable aspects of the online course is this Q&A aspect of it, because people can ask me their individual questions that came up with the material. So you're engaging with material in a self-paced way, and you can download it anytime, take it with you anywhere in the world, but then you're also getting some individual attention to answer any questions about how you're applying the specific intuitive eating principles in your life. So you can learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. And then finally, if you like the podcast and you want to help us reach more people who need to hear the health at every size message, you can rate, review, and share on iTunes. That's a great way to help us get the word out because it brings us up higher in the rankings, and therefore more people can find us when they need to hear the health at every size message. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Anna Sweeney. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
So I think I had a pretty normal relationship with food growing up. I actually am from Rapid City, South Dakota, and was raised by 2 East Coast parents. My mom is from Virginia. My father is from actually the Boston area. And so I grew up in the middle of the country with a mom who I have very specific memories of her taking us to kind of natural food stores. I think there was one in Rapid City, and, always buying the romaine lettuce and not the iceberg lettuce. So I never had any energy about food as a child. There was, I had access to the foods that I wanted. I do have specific memories of going over to my friends' homes and being really excited and really energized about oh my God, you have Reese's Puffs? I can eat Reese's Puffs, and eating 4 bowls of Reese's Puffs because I've never had something so peanut buttery and chocolatey and cereally at the same time. And that would not have been something that my mother would have not necessarily allowed. There were, occasions where we had Gushers or where we had Lunchables because that was a thing. But really, I think I grew up kind of with some implicit and probably explicit messages around food and kind of righteousness around food. And I think had I been raised in Massachusetts where I live now, I don't think that comparison would have been so stark, except in the middle of the country, life is it's just different. But I spent a lot of time. Actually, I didn't really cook then, but we had a garden in our backyard, And we didn't do a lot of kind of harvesting. I was not the kind of South Dakotan that had a tractor or anything like that. But food and eating was really quite normal while I was a kid, with the exception of kind of my mom's stuff, which has in my adulthood kind of emerged and has been very, very interesting, certainly as a clinician, to be able to kind of look back and think about, what was being said and how I was internalizing some of the messages about food being like, this is the good kind of lettuce and this is the bad kind of lettuce. And if you want a sweet, like here's this like honey stick. You ever
Oh,
heard
yes.
those honey, like that's not that's the honey. Honey is sweet. You're right, but that's not sweet.
Right. It's just pure honey. It's like
Right.
there's nothing to it.
It's delicious, but
Mhm.
I remember being, really jazzed about like the day that we went and I got the honey stick. And so I didn't have anything really to compare it to, except when I would go to my friends' houses, I would have access to food that I thought was really, really exciting.
Yeah. Did that make those foods seem like the forbidden fruit? You said you ate a lot of like the Reese's Puffs when you had access to them. Was it sort of like this, got to get it in now while I have it?
And of course, in retrospect, it makes so much sense. And I didn't think about the fact that I was eating several bowls of Reese's Puffs at a time, because I was just thinking about the fact that it tasted really good. And I am certain that had I been given access to a variety of different foods, the foods that I was drawn to when visiting with a friend, they would have had less energy because it would have been just food, not this thing that my mom, didn't include in my home.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And so did that shape your relationship with food going forward then, as an adolescent especially?
So as an adolescent, I have very specific memories, and I'm actually going to. So I will back up a little bit and just say, so I moved from Rapid City, South Dakota, to a suburb outside of Boston when I was 13 years old. So I was going into 8th grade. I was really upset, really, really, really sad to be coming to the East Coast. Life in the middle happens, or at least in my experience, it just happens a little bit more slowly. So I was playing with like doing my hair and my makeup when I was in 5th grade. And that certainly is not, I don't think that's what's happening on the East Coast, but absolutely it happens very, very early in the Midwest. And again, that wasn't something that was modeled by my mom, but it was something that was going on. My friends were doing it, so I was doing the same thing. And when I moved when I moved from South Dakota, I really had this sense that like my life was kind of figured out. Like I knew who I was going to go to like high school with and then college with, and we were going to stay friends forever. And moving to the East Coast was a really tough transition for me. But food really nothing really changed about the way that we were eating. It just, we had access to more produce that excited my mother when we moved here.
Interesting. And so, yeah, so your relationship with food wasn't the focus, but I'm sure that was really destabilizing to move at that age.
Yes, it certainly was. And it was just a difficult transition to come from the Midwest to the East Coast. And I remember one of the first memories I have of living in Acton was walking into a grocery store and holding the door for someone and smiling at a stranger and getting these really awful looks from these people because I don't know you, but I'm holding the door for you or I'm smiling at you because I really grew up kind of like South Dakota is the place where like you wave to people on the road, even if you don't know who they are. There's like the one finger lift off of the steering wheel. There's just this like general acknowledgement of other humans on the planet that I was really not prepared to have not only not reciprocated, but kind of like there's this sense of like, if I'm smiling at you, it means that I'm kind of like stalking you, or something is not happening here that's above board. And so that was an interesting social observation for me to make. And in some ways, I think I still have some of my South Dakotan characteristics, but I am sad to say that in others, I am certain that I have been more acclimated socially to living on the East Coast.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I really identify with that feeling. Like if someone is smiling at me or doing something out of their way for me, I'm just like, what's going on?
Oh my God. Oh my God.
My boundaries are being violated. You know?
Exactly. And it's just a bizarre thing. And as a young adolescent, it was very strange, because I grew up playing outside and there were no rules about, like I had great neighborhood, and all the kids in the neighborhood, like I remember building tree forts and going on nature hikes, and like literally my mom or mother or father would open the door and scream and like, it's dinner time. And like my sister and I would run in and like all sweaty, and after doing whatever it is that we did. But moving to the East Coast really changed that, because the amount of oversight that parents have and had on their kids even then was really different from what it was like in the Midwest, which makes sense. I understand that. But it was a big shift. And with regard to food, nothing in my early adolescence, really nothing shifted. I felt really neutrally about food. I have lived with thin privilege my whole life. And actually, I was thinking about this. My extended family also lives with thin privilege on both sides. So I have not grown up with a ton of body diversity around me, but my parents have friends that have lived in different bodies, and I've had friends that have lived in different size and race and sexuality. But like it's through my whole life, I've had a variety of people in my life. And I think that, moving from the middle of the country, most people are blonde hair and blue eyed, and that was just what it was. That was certainly not my experience. Although my hair is blonde now, it is not blonde because that's how I came out. And I was raised Jewish in Rapid City, and we had a community of like 30 people in our synagogue.
Wow.
And I have a memory there was a guy called like the Schwann's Man. So it was this frozen delivery meals. He would drive around to like everybody's home. And I remember having him knocking on the door and seeing a mezuzah outside of the front door of our house. And Katie and my sister and I went to the door, and he asked what that was. And Katie says, my sister's younger than I am, and said, it's a mezuzah. And he said, well, what's that? And she said something to the effect of, it's something about being Jewish. And he looked at her and said, well, we don't like Jews.
My God.
It was like, ooh, oh, really? That was my first something doesn't fit here. And certainly moving to the East Coast, that part of my life is not something that has ever felt like I don't fit. And really, my relationship with food stayed really quite neutral until the end of my freshman year in high school. I went through, normal adolescent weight shifting, felt a bit uncomfortable in my body, kind of moving into puberty. And I remember doing a lot of comparison. I remember looking around at all the other girls in my class and feeling like I didn't kind of cut the mustard, and working kind of hard to do whatever I could to meet the standard that was being set. And so that looked like, I don't know, doing my hair in a different way, transitioning from the high tube socks that are now in again.
Yes.
So that's when I moved from South Dakota, that was cool. When I came here, the no sock look was really cool. That was a very hard, my first day at school. I came home and I was like, Mom, we need to go shopping right now because I can't wear those socks anymore. Like that can't happen here. And Katie went to school and she came home with like, oh, I've made 7 friends on her first day. And I came home and I felt like I wanted to pull my hair out. Like it was not a simple transition.
I think those things that you notice that are different, new situation, are so heightened when you're a kid, right? It's like
absolutely
feeling out of place, feeling like you don't belong. I remember that too, because I moved in 4th grade, not very far, but just like from a more urban location to a more suburban location where it was a lot more, white, not very diverse, economically, sort of more upper middle class, I guess. And my family was sort of like, we had strived really hard to get there. And my parents wanted me to be there because the public schools were really good. So if we could, live there and pay the property tax, I could go to public school rather than having to, try to find a school that was, because there was a lot of gang violence in the school that I would have gone to for junior high, and they didn't want that. So it was like, I get why the move was necessary, but it was so painful.
Totally.
And I felt so out of place.
Totally.
Suddenly, all the clothes, it was the same thing, going from like the 80s look that was really popular in Oakland, where I moved from, to this little suburb where it was like everybody shopped at the Limited too. And you had to have like the striped Henley with the matching shorts, like chino shorts. And I was like, what is this? And I'm completely wrong. Everything about me is wrong. My haircut, my accessories, my clothes from Payless. Like, what are we doing here?
Exactly.
And it was the same thing too. My little sister went to kindergarten and was like, I have all these friends. I'm so happy.
Fucking hate you, Katie.
Oh, right?
I love you, but I hate you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a really difficult transition. By the time I'd gotten into high school, things were, again, I still wasn't feeling awesome. I wasn't feeling awesome in my body, but just from an adolescent place. I was friends with a lot of people. I was friends with a lot of boys, and a lot of boys, like everyone wanted to be my friend and no one wanted to date me. And I remember feeling very like kind of being curious about like, why, like, what is that? What's wrong with me here? I don't get that. I didn't know what that was all about, but it certainly didn't affect anything. And to be honest with you, I think about the beginning of high school. I remember going to high school and being so excited because they had bagels for like any time you wanted. And they would put like this, like a pound of butter in like, those little trays that like you would get like it from a hot dog stand, like something to just hold.
Oh yeah.
Like, yeah. So they would like put this pound of butter out in front of the toaster, and we would just like toast our bagels and put however much butter we wanted on top of the bagels and move on with our days. But I remember being in high school and having a bagel for breakfast and eat like with butter, or a bagel and butter for lunch, or pasta and butter for lunch, or and by the time I was driving, going out and exploring a whole bunch of different foods, but I certainly wasn't thinking about quote unquote health. And I, at this point, was probably doing a little bit of rebelling from some of my mom's kind of strictures around food. And that obviously that changed a lot when I got a car. But at the end of my freshman year of high school, I'm going to try and not make this such a super long story, but I went to my best friend John's house. We were playing basketball outside, and he had lowered the hoop all the way down, and I dunked the basketball, like dunked with clothes around it, because I'm not a jock and I never have been, and like that's just not what it was. But I dunked a basketball, and the next day, a couple days later, the sensation in my right hand started changing. It was funny. Like I couldn't feel hot and cold. I couldn't really hold on to a pencil. my mom called her father, who was a doctor, and he said, go get a neurological exam. Make sure she hasn't done nerve damage to her shoulder. So we went to an outpatient clinic in one of the other suburbs, and they did a pitchfork test on my left. So this is my right hand. I couldn't really use the way I wanted to. And I couldn't feel vibration on my left big toe. And so the neurologist actually asked me to leave the room and talked to my mom, which is, in retrospect, gave me a lot of time to really make up what was going on.
Yeah. Ugh.
So 2 days later, I am in an MRI tube. And this is, MRI technology has come a really long way in the last 20 plus years. But I had been in this MRI tube for what to me felt like an hour and a half. I have no actual concept of time, but it was a really long time. The rad tech actually took me out. He wanted to position my neck in a different way. And I asked what was taking so long. And this technician said, well, we're trying to rule out MS. And I lost my bananas. I am a 15-year-old. My only reference point for people with multiple sclerosis was one of my mom's friends in South Dakota has MS. And my mom talked about her symptoms being like feeling like she has a pine cone in her bladder.
Oh.
Like, that sounds awful. Lost it. My mom pulled me out, like we ended up going home. She actually gave me this like beautiful sterling with pewter silver heart-shaped paperweight and said, I hope your heart is never this heavy. And that was very sweet. But by the time I had gotten home, my legs, the sensation on my legs, it was like fire. I was in pain. It was burning. The next morning, my parents took me to Children's Hospital in Boston. And for the next 5 days, I was given IV steroids. And at the end of my 5th day, I was called into this really small library on the floor that I was staying on. And the doctor said, she drew a picture of my brain and said, well, you have these really beautiful bright spots in your brain. And she drew kind of what demyelinating lesions look like in the brain and talked about the fact that when we put this contrast dye in, they light up. So we can see that there's active demyelination happening. And I left that room. I left my parents in that room, and I went back to I guess I'll call it my bedroom, but like where I was sleeping at the hospital, and really was pretty numb, because now here I am 5 days into steroids, other than noticing that I was really hungry because steroids.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt fine, right? Like everything had resolved. My hand felt fine. Everything was good. And I just went home with this really big diagnosis, but not before, like not my whole school, but one of my friends made a really, really, really big, like, I don't even know what the size of the paper is, but not 8.5 by 11, but like 17 by something, made this huge card. And like everybody at the school signed it. Like these people that I didn't know, like all of the hot senior boys, they signed my card. What?
Oh.
Like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah.
But I was a child. I'm 15 years old. I have this really big diagnosis. And I remember the first neurologist that I met with this is the first time that food ever got kind of wonky for me, talked about the importance of eliminating saturated fat from my diet.
Oh no.
But I became pretty preoccupied with what I was feeding myself, and simultaneously, of course, with best of intentions, so did my mom, and so did my dad to some degree. And I'm not talking about my dad because he was some absentee father. He's been very present, but in terms of food, my mother really, I mean, she took it upon herself to do the best that she could to really help me to follow through with whatever this new kind of guideline was. So I remember going to the grocery store and buying like tofu hot dogs, which are not my preference, and getting things that were quote unquote good for my brain. I remember my mother buying me a juicer at one point and saying, like, this is for you. If you're feeling symptomatic, like, don't eat food, drink juice. And again, really good intentions. And it speaks to, and I think this is like so much of what we see in the news right now with kind of orthorexia and this concept of like perfect eating being at the forefront. It is so much about access, and it's about privilege, right? Because if my family weren't in a position to buy me a juicer and then buy me all of this kale or whatever it was that was supposed to go in there, like that, this would have never been a thing that would have been considered.
Totally. And back then too, that wasn't as popular or well known.
No.
The sort of access to information, right? Like, and I imagine this was before the internet was really a thing. Like, you couldn't just go on and research whatever you wanted.
Not quite. Not quite. Yep. And my mom, actually, when we moved to Massachusetts, there's a natural food store that's pretty close to our house. And my mom is actually best friends with the woman who owns the store. And she will come up later on in this conversation too. But my mom, obviously, with best of intention, wanted to take really extra special care of me. And so it changed the way that I looked at food for the first time. I was scared of food. I was thinking about food being something that could hurt me. Then I just kind of reminded myself, then I remembered that I was just 15 and kind of like, I am impervious. The world is not going to get me. Like, I'm not actually going to get sick. This is not really a thing. It's totally fine. And so I just kept doing what I was doing. My mom got me a gym membership to the nicest gym in the area and rode me really pretty hard about going. Again, as I said, like, I'm not an athlete, never really have been. And that's not to say that I don't like moving my body, but having this message of do this so that you won't get worse, or do this so that you will stay well. The message was really, really well intended, and I completely bucked against it. It was a complete rebellious, like, screw that, not happening. I'm not going.
Yeah, at 15, it's really true. Like you said, the sense of like immortality is
Absolutely.
Very strong at that age. And the sense too, I'm sure the diagnosis was really scary, and there's probably a way in which you wanted to just not believe that it was going to get worse or that this could happen to you.
And to be honest with you, Christy, like, I didn't know. I think when I was diagnosed, everyone said, this is a great time to have this diagnosis. And relative to the 1800s, yes, it's a great time to have a diagnosis of anything. Like, we're all very fortunate to live in the era that we're a part of. And in retrospect, I feel like, and this is where I get a little tripped up, because sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe, gosh, I really wish that I would have listened to my mom. But I can't promise you that that would have actually made any difference. And I have come quite a long ways from really kind of holding myself in a place of blame. But again, I'm spinning too quickly. I'm going too far ahead. So I'm going to pull myself back to adolescence. And I think I did a lot of kind of rebellious eating, but it really, really like wasn't a thing that I thought about. I didn't feel particularly uncomfortable in my body in any unusual way. I compared myself to my peers because in high school still, everyone wanted to be my friend, but no one wanted to date me. And that, whatever, high school boys are crazy.
Totally.
Or something like that. But it was just a strange time. But I remember this outpouring of love that happened when I got this diagnosis. This diagnosis that I really couldn't connect to because I was a child. But then I had like the whole school is telling me how like sorry they are and how much they hope that I feel better. And like that was unbelievable. Like that response was a really incredible thing as a young, kind of uncomfortable adolescent. That was some extraordinary reinforcement of like, wow, when you're sick, look what happens to you. That was really powerful.
Yeah, I bet.
And I ended up having 13 flares through my high school career. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I spent a lot of time doing home infusions, going to school with IVs kind of like sticking out of my arm. And, I would just do school. And, it became a bit of my identity, but it also, I experienced for the first time the difference between what happened on that first big diagnosis. Like that was a big deal. And then every single time I flared in high school, it pulled me back to that first time of being this fragile, scared child. And nobody around me responded as though it was this big, scary thing because they were used to it, right? Like I was old news already. So it wasn't something that like people needed to show how much they cared or whatever. They had their own experience. But I remember feeling really like, oof, gosh, I really wish that people would kind of respond to me the way that they did initially because this is really scary.
Right.
But it didn't happen quite that way. And then I experienced kind of a big T trauma in high school. And in response to that, and already feeling pretty uncomfortable in my body and feeling pretty shameful about this big diagnosis that, again, for the most part, I mean, I certainly wasn't limited in my ability to do anything. And it wasn't something day to day that someone would look at me and say like, oh, I know you have something going on. But I felt pretty cruddy about myself, and it changed the way that it changed the way that I interfaced with boys in some ways. And I actually lost most of my friends from high school in response to what I think was perceived as me kind of leading boys on, because at some point, whether it was because I found a bra or something like that, or just people grew up, at some point, like several of my friends wanted to date me at the same time. And I didn't know, like that was new. I didn't know what to do with that feeling and that experience. And so this is actually something I feel really pretty icky about because it's not representative of me. But I was actually voted in the high school superlatives for like yearbook.
Mm-hmm.
I was voted biggest flirt.
Oh.
I was not a flirt. I was friends with most everybody in my school. I was friendly. I thoughtful, and it felt like a very direct, like everyone, let's get together and decide who we're voting for.
Mm.
And so like icky, icky, icky. That's not fun.
No, it sounds like it was like a sort of condemnation of you,
Yeah.
even though it was supposed to be this like cute, funny thing.
And I'm not even sure if it was supposed to be a cute, funny thing, because by that time I kind of pulled myself out of my social loop. It didn't really work for me. And so when college came around, I was really excited to, start again and go someplace where no one knew anything about me. And I was a communications major. I went to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and I was gone I stayed for about a month. So at this point my MS I was being treated with chemo and with another injectable drug. And I really just didn't feel well. So I came home. And when I came home, I was greeted by a sister who I actually didn't recognize. So one part that I actually left off of this story. So I was 17 years old. Katie's 2 years younger than me. My senior year, my sister was a big journaler for forever. And I walked into her bedroom and her journal was open and it said, well, I guess I have an eating disorder. And it was specific. It spoke to a specific eating disorder. It said, I guess I have bulimia. And none of my friends had eating disorders. I hadn't experienced an eating disorder. I didn't have people around me who had. I was taking Katie to the mall. And so she got in my car and I proceeded to yell at her, like, Katie, what are you doing? You're so beautiful. You're so smart. Everybody loves you. You're so good at sports. Why would you do this? Like, really, I mean, this is a 17-year-old really not understanding what this actually meant. And in retrospect, the year that I was diagnosed, my parents really focused all of their attention on me. It really was all about what's happening with Anna. And so they stopped seeing Katie. And I actually didn't really know. I didn't know. I mean, we got to the mall and Katie literally ran away from me in the mall and she was crying and I was crying. And I don't believe that there was ever any real resolution or any kind of follow up to that conversation. I don't know what I did with that information. I feel like I should have done more, but I don't think I did.
It sounds like you didn't know anything about eating disorders. You thought you could just tell her to stop and she would stop.
Right. Which in retrospect, like, that's silly me, but I was a kid and I didn't know. And so when I came back from Miami, my sister was really, 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 really struggling and visibly in every way, like really in her eating disorder. And it made me really scared. And I'm also going to say that, so I'm in college at this point. I was away at school in Boston, and it was the first time that I ever actually felt like negatively about my body in comparison to my sister. I had some moments of feeling like, oh, maybe like I kind of want to look like Katie. And I didn't ever really do anything with that, but I recall just feeling really scared, but also having this like weird envy thing that I feel gross saying now, but I think it's pertinent.
Oh, yeah. I think it's important to talk about that too, because I know a lot of people experience that. And I think living in a culture with a thin ideal, a body type that is held up to us, that is basically emaciated.
Right.
And that's supposed to be the pinnacle of beauty.
Right.
There is that reaction. I've definitely talked to parents of kids with eating disorders who've had this. And I experienced this with my own mom, actually, when I was in my eating disorder, that like there was an envy and a sort of like, oh, what are you doing to lose weight like that? Maybe I should do that.
Right.
And at the same time, a fear and sort of acknowledgement that something's not right. This is the person's hurting themselves. So yeah, I think that's important to give voice to and to sort of understand that it comes from a context too. It's not like you're a bad person for having those feelings, because if we lived in a non-fat phobic society, if we lived in a society that really valued all bodies, I think it would be easier to say like, oh my gosh, this person is really suffering.
Absolutely.
Rather than like, oh, I'm scared for her and I kind of want to look like her, which is so painful.
Yeah. And so I actually, this leads to, I took my first nutrition class in college and I loved it. And I then decided that I was going to study nutrition and I was going to become an eating disorder dietitian so that I can tell my sister that people get better. And that I graduated college in 2.5 years and I was accepted into my master's. I finished my master's degree after my internship, but all told, it took me 5 for all of it.
That's amazing. Oh my
It's
God.
also kind of stupid, but I didn't take a break. I didn't take a breather. I didn't do anything.
Yeah. It sounds like you really didn't have a lot of time for fun or self-care or any of that stuff.
No, that wasn't my focus. And at the time, what I said was, and it's so funny kind of thinking about this in retrospect, I said a lot of like, well, I want to do this while I can still do this, right? I want to do this work while my body is still going to allow me to do it. And to be frank with you, Christy, when I said that, I mean, I'm 18, 19, 20, 21, like I still had no idea that at some point my body would in fact change. But it made sense to be able to kind of justify, like, why are you doing this at such an accelerated pace? Why have you not had summer vacation in 3 years? Like, that's crazy. And I have to tell you, I'm really grateful that I did it in the way that I did, because I'm now in the position that I am, and I have the opportunity to do the work that I love. And I'm grateful that I've had the experiences that I've had. And had things been stretched out in a different way, who knows where things would have gone. I have a lot of gratitude for my kind of bullshitting and just saying, like, I know at some point I'm going to be disabled, so I want to be able to do this while I'm able-bodied. But I didn't really think very much about food in college. It was pretty neutral. I still had a mom with ideas about what I should and probably shouldn't be eating, but by that time I was the one with the nutrition degree, so things had shifted a little bit.
Studying nutrition didn't trigger you at all, or do you feel like, yeah.
So that was one of those things in Nutrition 101, and this happens to kind of coincide with Katie, with my moments of jealousy with Kate the most. The food recall, the diet recall that we all do in school, and we all kind of lie in school, do these diet recalls. I remember that was the first time I had ever thought about calories. I'd ever looked at food in that way. I remember truly lying about what I was putting on paper, because there was a sense of like, well, you're a nutrition major, like you should be eating whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually falsified my 24-hour recall, and that led to, but that recall itself actually led to me going through a phase of tracking pretty consistently the foods that I was eating and writing things down and tracking calories, not necessarily to do something with that, but it just, I don't know, there was something about school giving me permission to do it that made it feel like, oh, this is a thing that I'm supposed to be doing.
Right. I had that experience too. I downloaded a calorie tracker and was very obsessive about logging and feeling like, oh, I need to meet this goal that this arbitrary tracker has set out for me. And, so triggering.
Well, so triggering. And, I was in school. I graduated a year ahead of my class, but I was in school with many. I went to Simmons College, which is a women's school, and I had a couple of people in my program that struggled in the context of being in the program with eating disorders, and it was really, really, really challenging to kind of watch and observe that happening while I was trained in what was a completely opposite of the way that I work now, but trained with weight loss and diet modification for the sake of avoiding the obesity epidemic apocalypse that we're all living through.
Right.
It was so much about, there is one right way to feed yourself and there are several wrong ways to feed yourself.
Yes. That was absolutely my experience in school too. The obesity epidemic rhetoric, I think, has been at such a fever pitch for the last 10 years. And I think most nutrition programs, although now Simmons College, interestingly, has our wonderful colleagues teaching an eating disorders program.
So fantastic.
Just so great. But yeah, I think for most of us who are practicing dietitians now, it's like we didn't have that kind of education. There was no talk of health at every size. It was all about calories and weight loss, like you said.
Right. And there was no time. I mean, to be truthful, I think I had a one seminar day about eating disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful because of the people that I have surrounded myself with and working in the area that I work with. You've mentioned this a couple of different times on your podcast. Boston is a pretty health at every size community, and we are all about intuitive eating, and we are all like this. It's a pretty nice niche. I don't know what other communities are like, but this has been a really wonderful place to kind of become the clinician that I am. And I certainly wouldn't be the clinician that I am if I were not raised, I'm saying raised, but like if I didn't come into my own as a professional in this area.
Yeah, it's really amazing how Boston has, become such a hotbed for health at every size.
Yes.
And that's just what is taught for eating disorder dietitians. It's like part of the curriculum or part of the approach, it seems like, which is interesting because when I was first learning about treating eating disorders, I was going to conferences and hearing about health at every size, and it was all making so much sense. But then coming back to my community in New York, where health at every size is not really the standard, and hearing people at treatment centers say like, well, she should really be losing weight and stuff like that. And just, having this sort of mental disconnect of like, wait, what? Okay. So I guess this is not entirely evidence-based medicine. That was kind of the first time I was like, oh, just because the science says it doesn't mean people are actually practicing that way.
Right. And it's not to say that everyone in Boston is a health at every size practitioner either, but I'm fortunate to have the community that I do now around me, because it certainly supports my getting better. And I think about, it's kind of crazy to think, Christy, about the things that you actually are taught in school about the work that we do. I don't think I use some of it, but like very, very little that I actually learned in school applies to the work that I do in my life now at all.
Same.
At all. Like most of it is like, I've gone to a bajillion conferences and I've read a bajillion books, and I hang out with really cool, really smart people that happen to be in line with the things that make sense to me. And that has been an extraordinary, extraordinary gift.
Yeah, same here. I think that's the way that it has to be for right now until the dietetics curriculum can ever be infused with health at every size. And I really think it should be. And there's so many efforts towards that now, which is really exciting.
Yes.
But yeah, like, for anyone listening, because I know I do have a lot of RD to be listeners, I think it is totally, at this point, a common thing to do to just like grit your teeth and get through school and know that that's probably not going to be the way you're practicing later on, and just go to a ton of conferences and get supervision and find health at every size colleagues online or in your area and learn as much as you can from them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm hopeful with you that we will have a new generation of RDs to be that will be coming out of school with, like real science and body acceptance, and, just like the real science part really works for me.
Yeah. Actual evidence-based medicine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Research. It's amazing.
Totally.
Amazing.
How was that transition for you? Like, when did you start to open your eyes to this other way of practicing?
So my first job, actually, out of college, I actually was fortunate enough to get a job at an eating disorder clinic outside of Boston. And very, very quickly, I knew that there were, things it didn't feel right to be kind of treating different bodies particularly differently based on simply on size. And I have to say, I'm very fortunate because we have MEDA, the Multi-Service Eating Disorder Association, is here. And so I became a dietitian. I started practicing as a dietitian, and Beth Mayer was there providing clinical supervision. And I latched on to anything. I read intuitive eating after I finished college. I read that. I was reading that while I was in my first job within the first couple of months of being there. And I was like, wait, what? What? Oh, then I really need to do this differently. But it was like this kind of like the sigh, because like none of it ever really clicked for me. And then this book kind of gave language to what I was kind of thinking and had been kind of trying to come up with words to be able to communicate to my clients.
And it sounds like you had that relationship with food for the most part too, as a kid.
Yes, I did. Yes. And that, I mean, what a gift. What a gift.
Seriously.
And I think, honestly, I think it is just that. I think it is just a gift.
Mm-hmm. So many of us don't get it, or get
right.
The rupture comes. I mean, I feel like for everyone, there is a rupture at some point in our intuitive eating process just because of the fat phobic society we live in and diet culture. And it touches us all in some way. But like for parents to be able to raise their kids as intuitive eaters for as long as they can and sort of preserve that bubble.
It actually is my favorite thing. Christy, one of my favorite things in the world is actually watching kids eat. Like, I love it so much.
It's so joyful.
Yeah, it's so, oh my gosh, like you can have a little bit of something over here, they'll do something else and then come back and like it's like there's just no energy. There's nothing about it's just like this tastes good or this tastes not good.
Yeah. My little 2-year-old nephew is like feeding people now. He'll like eat something and then he'll come over and be like, eat some. And he'll like put it in your mouth, So cute.
That's the best.
Yeah.
I wish that we could, and this is like, I feel really grateful to work in a field where I can say really confidently that can be regained by adults, right? We have, I think, a lot of adults come into my practice and a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, they come in and they're looking to be taught. And in fact, I believe that at the root of it, a lot of what we actually need to do is unlearn the messages that have been thrown at us since the time we were wee little things and really getting back to trusting our bodies. That's where the magic happens.
Yes. Amen.
And that's the exciting stuff.
Yeah. And that's so well said that unlearning is really the important thing because we're born knowing, right? We have the knowledge, we have the it's not even learning, it's instinct, really. It's it's intuition. And then that gets buried by all of the learning and diet culture messages. And so to sort of strip those away really does reveal a much simpler, easier way of relating to food.
Yep.
In my Facebook group for my online course, we were talking recently about how you approach nutrition once you've gone through intuitive eating. And someone said like, I really don't think about it. Like now that I'm done with the course and I've broken down diet mentality and I've done all these steps to like get back in a peaceful relationship with food, it just sort of comes naturally. Some days I want more fun food. Some days I want more nutrient dense food. Some days it's a mix and it all kind of evens out and I don't worry too much about it. And it's like, yes. And that's exactly what, when you watch a little kid eat, that's what happens.
Yes.
Some days, some meals, it's like they just want to drink milk and eat a cracker and that's it. And some days they're like eating everything and want seconds and it all evens out.
Absolutely. And that is my favorite. That's my favorite part of this work is really witnessing that and the kind of the excitement of like, oh my gosh, I can actually eat this. And like, I actually really I can eat this.
Mm-hmm.
Woo,
yes.
I love that. So I've been very fortunate in my professional experiences to have a lot of really wonderful experiences in which I think I learn more from my clients than they probably learn from me. And that is a gift.
Absolutely. How did that change your relationship with food when you started working with clients on this type of recovery?
So to be honest with you, it really didn't change my relationship with food. There is another step to this. So at one point, I stopped working at one organization and I'm the director of nutrition services for Monte Nido. And when Monte Nido opened in Boston, I was asked to be the dietitian at that residential facility. And I was so charmed by the idea of there is no such thing as a meal plan, and we are going to feed you like real tasty food. We had we had and have a really lovely chef, and I got to create these menus that I was feeding my clients foods that I wanted to eat myself. And I loved so much. I really loved that job. I loved being able to go in. I would always go in early and have breakfast with the ladies, and then we'd have lunch. And one of my favorite things is watching what happens when people and when their relationships with food shift from being in a place of fear to being in like kind of a more open, curious space, and really shifting. And this is kind of pulling off of Sandra Kronberg's language, but shifting from this place of preference to position and going back and forth between those two things. So a lot of clients coming in with this position of like, I don't eat X, Y, and Z, as compared to saying, I don't prefer to eat. Like, I don't like carrots, but I don't have a position about carrots. I can eat carrots, that's fine, but that's just not what I like. And watching and really witnessing clients make that shift, I think part of what made me really good in my position, and probably part of what led me to being promoted to the national director position, was based on the fact that I really modeled normal eating, and it was really, it was really easy and really fun and really exciting. And I did that for as long as I could. And then my body came a calling in a different way. So most of my career, I remember my first job I had on my resume that Anna Peabody that's my maiden name. And the Anna Peabody Fund was a thing when I was a child. We raised some money for MS research, and I had that on my resume because I was right out of school. And she asked me a lot of questions about kind of what that was. I didn't actually have a great experience as being someone with MS. I think I was targeted in some ways professionally in my first job, which is really different from what was happening when I was a teenager, because I was like, I had parents coming up to me and saying, "Oh my God, you look so great." Like I had a brand new disease. We hadn't gotten to that place yet, but I had a lot of positive reinforcement. This is even my college admissions essay was about, my new normal, and this is not who I am. It's just part of who I am. And in my first kind of professional soiree, really having that not be allowed, it was weird. And I don't want to speak more specifically about it, but it was my first time feeling like, oh, I feel really embarrassed about this. And I don't want to talk about it, and I don't want to struggle. And so making the transition and actually going to Monte Nido, I met Carolyn Costin for the first time, and I was telling her why I wasn't helping her carry a big rug from upstairs on the third floor to the first. And she was like, "Oh, no big deal. Like, all bodies are welcome here. And, this part of your truth, tell everybody." And so talking about my body story in a clinical fashion was allowed for the first time, and it actually became pretty important for the first time. And all the while, so I had a little limp. Actually, I told my mom the other day, my husband and I watched our wedding video, and I had no idea that I was limping when I was getting married. And I watched my video, and we're almost at 6 years now, and it's like, oh my God, I had a limp then? I didn't even know. Like I thought I was not limping, but I was. I didn't know. And so fast forward to where we are now, 2016, kind of on a whole, I'm just going to say 2016 was kind of a shit year.
Amen.
And not at all helped by mockery of handicapped people and speaking about women in really, really violating terms that I didn't really recognize, but watching the news, begrudgingly, and feeling myself be like, oh my God, I'm like triggered right now. Like what is happening here? So kind of a culmination, again, that was my cherry on top of a pretty challenging year in terms of disability. Because over the years, my family has, my parents flew, I worked with an acupuncturist and we paid for some monk to be flown over and and not pray, but do energy work with me. And I've tried a million different things. I have Lyme disease. Why wasn't I treated for Lyme disease? Should we treat Lyme disease? There are other things, and I've in the last several years, kind of chased after, really wanting this diagnosis to not be the end of the story. And so I've spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of emotional space looking for some fix. And it turns out I have other things, but I totally have MS. And so my final test around this was actually about making some really substantial changes to my diet. And I'm saying this with shame is the wrong word, but this is something that I brought to my supervision group because I had decided, I'm feeling really badly. I'm no longer paying for this really expensive acupuncture treatment, whatever. I'm too smart to ignore some of the research about neurological health. And so I'm going to follow this particular diet, right? And this woman has MS, and she wrote on the cover of her book how I healed myself from progressive MS. And I, really smart person, knowing that healing from progressive MS is not actually a thing, was like, yeah, I want to do that. So I went on a probably about 4-month soiree. And I'm not going to be specific about the food, and I certainly don't want to call this woman out because I think I'm really glad that she had a really positive experience with eating cups of vegetables a day and organ meat and
I think I know who you're talking about because I had a client who had followed her protocol for a while too. Yeah.
And so really, really, I'm certain well-intended. The thing is, I didn't feel better and I still had MS and I was desperate. So I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to forgo all of the foods that I love. I am going to stop enjoying eating. And for the first time in my whole life, eating became mechanical. It was not something that I at all looked forward to. It was something I didn't enjoy. And it required me to stop eating food with my clients in session, which is actually one thing that I really like doing. And this is why I brought it to supervision. Can I still be a good eating disorder dietitian if I am following these rules, right? If I'm not eating with my clients, can I still be effective? Can I still be helpful? And they all, with a very resounding yes, said, yes, of course, take care of yourself. But that was a really hard thing for me. And it was the first time that I actually went through my own diet backlash. This was supposed to work. This was supposed to heal me from this thing. And oh my gosh, I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken. And then I was mad. And I went through my own little stages of grief around it. And I ultimately made the decision that if having a bite of chocolate was going to make me feel sick, then I might as well just forget all of this because the world is more important than not being able to eat food. And so I stopped, and I actually stopped following the diet probably a week before I went to Las Vegas. So there was and I this is not in any way about IADEP, but I went to the IADEP conference and I was there and I ate all of the food and that wasn't a big deal. But we were housed in a very large hotel casino. And so at this point in my life, I can walk. Generally speaking, I walk with a cane. If I'm at my home, I use a walker because, to be very frank with you, canes falling on the ground is a very scary sound. And my husband really does not care. Neither does my dog. Nobody cares for the sound of that clatter because you're expecting to see a woman on the floor after it. So transitioning to a walker just made more sense for the sake of the lack of the noise. But in my practice and in most of my life, I don't walk with a walker. But because of the size of this resort and because I didn't really want this to be a thing, I made the decision to rent a scooter. I recognize that, like the idea of renting a scooter is like really not a big deal because it's like being on a go-kart and that's fun and everything. And the first day that I got there, it actually was that, right? So there was nobody there. I was in the exhibit hall. I flew in with a couple of my colleagues and it was fun. My scooter could go 15 miles an hour, which was amazing. When I put it on care setting, it went really fast. When it was on tortoise setting, it was really slow. So it was fine before the conference actually started. On the first day of the conference, I am in this massive exhibit hall and I experienced for only the second time, but really I'm going to call this the first time, I experienced for the first time in my life being really invisible. People not looking at me, people not engaging me. So marketers are all over the place, right? You're supposed to sell me on your programs. They're not even talking to me. I had told colleagues that I was going to be in a scooter. I have colleagues that walked past me several times. I was in a mess. I mean, it's not subtle. I was in a big ass scooter and it was like humiliating and horrifying all at the same time. And I really, not only were people not looking at me, I heard people saying like, "Oh, I wonder what's going on with her," because I'm young and I don't look physically challenged. And so hearing people talk about me was one thing, but really not being regarded. Like I have the same name tag. It says I'm a CEDRD. Like I really actually belong here. And I'm not being included here. And I'm certainly not speaking about everyone. There were 970 people at this conference. I didn't know most of those people, but most of the people didn't look at me. And it took me back to, and I would have never otherwise experienced this, but I remember walking into a Safeway. So that was the grocery store we had in South Dakota, walking into a Safeway and seeing a woman walking out who had really pretty extraordinary dermatitis. I don't know what was going on, but I remember consciously, like I can see her face. I remember consciously not looking at her, like very actively saying, "Oh, that's different. I'm not looking." And so what I realized was that was what everyone was doing, right? They were trying to be polite and not stare at that other thing. And Marcy Evans and I traveled together as a group of us, but Marcy provided me with feedback a couple of days in, and she's like, "Anna, like you're totally right. People aren't engaging you. It's really weird." And so one, it felt really nice to have my experience validated by another human. But of all of the places, we are supposedly, right? We are accepting of all bodies. We are not here to be oppressive to people who live in larger bodies or smaller bodies or based on the color of your skin or your sexual orientation. Like this is, I went to presentations talking about body image and talking about body image for people who are in like intersex. And there was a time where I was sitting in my scooter and a woman asked the audience, "Do you guys have experiences of noticing people appraising you differently?" And a woman raised her hand and said, "Yes, I know as I've gotten older, people don't look at me in the same way that they used to. And that feels bad." And she brought up several different examples of kind of ways that people are not seen. I was in a fucking scooter and we did not talk about ability. And I was so upset and I was a little bit too much of a wuss to like raise my hand and be like, hello,
Right.
what is this? But it was kind of, Brene Brown's like breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
It was like my breakthrough moment because I no longer have the ability to not identify myself as a disabled woman. And I no longer want to not identify myself as a disabled woman. I'm not sure what I want to do with that. But I do not want anyone anywhere to feel the way that I felt over those 4 days. It was just shocking.
That sounds so painful. And being someone who has such gifts and expertise and value to add in this field, feeling like you're suddenly invisible just because of a disability, just because of one difference in how you present your body to the world. And like, that must have felt so invalidating of everything you've worked for and everything else that you have to offer.
It was pretty awful. And probably the worst part was when I reversed it, like the sound that a Mack truck makes when it's backing up, like that beep, beep, beep. It was deafeningly loud. So there was nothing subtle about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, here I am. I want to, literally, I want to disappear. And here is this very loud beep to not let me disappear. And really interestingly, so one of my husband's good friends was in the area and I ended up having dinner with him and being on the regular casino floor, not with our group, but on the regular casino floor. Strangers smiled at me. People are like engaging with me like it's no big deal.
Wow.
So again, whether it's because they've been at the casino since 9 o'clock in the morning and they've been there all day, or because they're accustomed to seeing, I honestly don't know. I wish I could explain that phenomenon more, like why people who are not in the field, as it were more accepting of my method of getting around than my peers were.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer.
That is bizarre. And I don't have an answer either. And it just, it seems like we do have a lot of implicit bias and ingrained prejudices in this field that I have noticed with regard to body size, of course. But like, I think there's a subset of people who treat eating disorders and body image issues and work with intuitive eating who like really understand the intersectionality of it, and that this is more than just people accepting their bodies up to a certain size, or more than just people who meet the sort of white, young beauty ideal, for the most part, accepting their bodies. It's like, it's for everyone, and it can't be limited to just certain groups, because otherwise the whole thing
is nothing.
Yeah. It's like built on a foundation of sand if we're not able to extend it to truly all bodies.
Yep.
And keep expanding our awareness and acceptance of different kinds of bodies, even when that's hard, and even when that challenges our need to be polite and to sort of avert our eyes from someone who seems different. We have to push through that in order to truly be doing the work of body acceptance for all bodies. And I think there's just some limitations in our field, especially with the sort of specific focus on eating disorders, where there's not a sense of like awareness around diet culture and intersectionality.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are too many people who sort of miss out on that kind of awareness and education.
I agree with you. Yeah. And I don't know. So I left the conference and it was really hard, but I actually think it was a really pretty extraordinary gift for me, because I have had so much, I have feelings about being a disabled woman and what that means. And by virtue of necessity, I'm here and I'm talking about this, and I want to talk more about this because it feels really important to me from a social justice place and just from a human place. And if honestly, if the only thing that people get out of this conversation is the idea that when you see someone who looks differently than you and you avert your gaze as to not stare, don't be fooling yourself to think that that actually is the polite thing to do. That feels really important to me. And I would have never, I didn't know. I did the same thing. I've always done the same thing. I just thought it was, I don't want to stare. It's rude.
I know. Same with me. That's how we're brought up, a lot of us in this culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's just not, that's not what that is.
Yeah. How do you hope people will interact with you differently? How would you have wanted people to see you at that conference?
So in truth, I really would have preferred people to ask me why I was sitting down. If you're going to interact with me and you're curious about it, ask me. Otherwise, talk to me. And it's so hard because the height differential is actually a thing. And so, I am 2 feet lower than you, and you have to make a conscious effort to kind of get your gaze down here. But fortunately, your vertebrae can do that. You can bend your neck rather, but I would have preferred anyone to just ask. If they were curious, to just ask me, because I would rather answer the question a million times than have people feel like there's something they're going to catch from me, or that because I have things to offer that extend beyond my lower body strength. Right?
Right.
That's not why I'm on this planet.
No.
That's not why I'm here. And this is why I'm putting together that survey for eating disorder dietitians talking about body image. I feel like having a body means that you're going to have your own relationship to your body in relation to the world, and it's something that's going to change from one day to another. And I really want for us to change the body conversation for ourselves as professionals so we actually can support one another in a different way. I don't feel like, at least in my experience, and you might have something that's different, Christy, but in my experience, working with eating disorder professionals, and if they're talking about having negative body image or slandering a part of their body, that would make my ears prick up, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I want to send clients to them.
Same here.
But there's a big difference between talking negatively about your body and just being human. There has to be some degree of acknowledgement of the fact that we live on this really broken planet, and if we're going to heal other people, we have to also be willing to kind of heal and help each other. And so I'm really hopeful that any of your listeners who are dietitians or dietitians to be will take that survey, so that I will have some robust material to present when I am speaking with Sumner for the EDRD Pro Symposium in August on this topic.
That is so cool. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, we had 150 responses. It's been less than a week. People want to talk about this. That's amazing.
That's totally amazing. Oh my gosh, I love it. Tell us more about the survey. What is it? Where can people find it? And also, what is it looking at specifically?
So the survey is actually, it's about body image and eating disorder nutrition professionals. So it's actually asking questions about the lived experience of being a practitioner who cares for humans with eating disorders and body image distress, and speaks to their own kind of lived body experiences, and talks about, it's unfortunately because of the nature of this survey, there's not going to be able to be a ton of material to be gleaned from this. There'll be a lot of associations, but I hope to be able to actually make this a larger study so that we can really make space for each other as practitioners to have our own body experiences and to be able to kind of welcome that conversation and help one another through it. Because I think, as a dietitian, I have a number of clients, and I've had a number of clients that talk, they look at me and they say like, "Oh my God, Anna, I want to have your body." Like, gosh, really? Really?
Right.
Really?
Like if you only knew.
And they do at this point. And actually watching the documentary Embrace was the thing that made it possible. Like I had always hidden my canes behind my chair. And then I saw that documentary and I'm like, you know what? I'm not hiding this anymore. So now my cane sits beside me in my office. And so Embrace was step 1. IADEP was step 2. And now, to be honest with you, Christy, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but this is really interesting to me. And I hope that we will be able to have a conversation like in like a year or something. And I'll have something fantastic with what comes out of this, at least preliminary research, and make it bigger.
I'm really excited for that. I want to hear more and see where you go with this. And I think it's so powerful. And I'm just so grateful for you sharing all of this with us here, because I know this is the first really public forum that you've spoken out about this on, right?
It is. This is not to steal language from the LGBTQ community, but this is like kind of my coming out party. Like I am officially holding up my hand and saying I'm a disabled woman, but I'm not changing my Twitter handle from Dietitian Anna to Disabled Dietitian. I am a disabled woman, and this is the field that I work in. And I don't want to actually hide anymore. I'm really grateful. IADEP has given me a big gift because I have come to a place of acceptance that I don't think I would have been able to otherwise.
That is really profound. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us and for your courage in coming to this place. It takes a lot.
I'm grateful. I've been practicing for 20 years, so it's about time.
It's about time. Well, tell us more about where people can find you and take the survey online.
So I am at Dietitian Anna on Twitter and Instagram. My Facebook page is Whole Life Nutrition Counseling. That's my private practice. And the survey is available I've posted a couple times on Twitter. I'll continue to make it available there. It's also available by way of the EDRD Pro Symposium. It's on that Facebook page, as well as the Mindful Dietitian, Fiona Sutherland's page. It's also there. And I think what I probably will do is have it be like a standingly available. I'll just make it available constantly on the Facebook page for Whole Life Nutrition, so that it will always be there. And maybe I'll do something on my Twitter kind of underneath my title. I don't know how to exactly do that, but I'll find a way.
Yeah, like a pin post or put it in your bio or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'll get the link from you and put it in the show notes for this episode so that people can just, whatever your podcast player is, if you go to the show notes for this episode, the link will be there. So you can go directly from here too.
That's so awesome.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Anna, so much for sharing everything with us. This was amazing.
Thank you, Christy. I appreciate it.
So that's our show. Thanks so much to our guest for sharing her story. And thanks to you all for listening. You can find full show notes for this episode, including everything we discussed here, at christyharrison.com/109. And grab your free guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food, by going to christyharrison.com/strategies. We're sponsored today by The Venture, a new branded podcast from Virgin Atlantic and Gimlet Creative. The Venture is all about the real adventures behind pioneering businesses from the people who lived them. There's one from the people who started Kill Rock Stars, the amazing indie record label. There's one about The Onion and The Real World, and the famous Los Angeles restaurant En Naka, whose head chef and owner might be the only female kaiseki chef in the United States. And if you don't know what kaiseki is, definitely listen to the episode. You can subscribe, listen to, and download The Venture wherever you get your podcasts. The music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now? Bullies want your food, and you ain't really beat. Have you ever went over your friends out?